My hand was still shaking when I signed my name. Not from grief. I'd cried that out 3 weeks earlier, alone, in a hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning. This was a different shake, the kind that comes when your fingers already know something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Across the table, my daughter-in-law crossed her legs, folded her hands over a manila folder, and smiled. Not a comforting smile. Not a grieving smile. A satisfied one. "Well," she said softly, sliding the folder an inch closer to herself. "I think Margaret would have wanted this handled efficiently." The lawyer didn't look up. My son wouldn't look at me at all. And that's when I understood. My wife hadn't even been in the ground for a month, and somebody at that table had already decided how the rest of my life was going to go. They just hadn't counted on me deciding something too. My name is Walter Hines. I'm 68 years old, and for 42 years I ran a furniture company out of a 2-car garage in Ashford County that grew into something with my name stenciled on the side of 6 delivery trucks. Hines Woodworks. Custom cabinetry, dining sets, the kind of furniture people save up for and hand down. I built the first workbench myself. My wife, Margaret, kept the books by hand for the first 11 years because we couldn't afford software and she trusted her own math more than a computer's anyway. We built something worth $3,800,000. The business alone was valued at $2.1 million. The house on Cedar Lane, paid off in cash, sat at $650,000. Investment accounts, another $850,000. A life insurance policy on Margaret's side worth $300,000, payable directly to me. 44 years of marriage. One son, Daniel, 41 years old, who I loved without condition and trusted without much thought. And Daniel had a wife named Vanessa, 38. Sharp dresser, sharper tongue when she thought no one important was listening. And, as I would come to learn over the following 6 weeks, a very particular relationship with the truth. Margaret passed in April, after an 11-month fight with pancreatic cancer that she handled with more grace than I've ever managed to handle a flat tire. I held her hand at the end. I promised her the family would be all right. I did not yet know how hard I'd have to work to keep that promise. The inheritance meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the funeral, at the office of our family attorney, a decent man named Roger Ashby, who'd handled our estate planning since 2004. I arrived in the gray suit I'd worn to bury my wife in, because it was the only suit that still fit right, and because some part of me thought that mattered. Daniel arrived 12 minutes late, tie loosened, looking like a man who hadn't slept, though I'd later learned that wasn't grief keeping him up. Vanessa arrived on time. Early, actually. She wore a cream-colored blazer, a string of pearls that looked new, and a Cartier bracelet I didn't recognize from any Christmas or birthday I'd ever paid for. She'd also brought a folder. Not Roger's folder. Her own. Tabbed. Color-coded. When Roger began reading the terms of the trust, the terms Margaret and I had written together, in this same office, for years earlier, Vanessa didn't listen so much as correct. "Actually," she said, 11 minutes in, "I believe there was an amendment discussed. Margaret mentioned wanting the business restructured before she passed. For tax efficiency." Roger blinked. "I have no record of that." "It wouldn't be in your file," Vanessa said, and smiled the way you smile at someone you've already decided doesn't matter. It was a family conversation. I sat there in my dead wife's favorite husband's suit and said nothing, because I was still operating on the assumption that grief made people say strange things, and that the woman my son loved wouldn't lie to a room full of people about a private conversation that never happened. I was wrong about that assumption. I just didn't know it yet. 2 days after the meeting, I drove to the Hines Woodworks office on Route 9 to pick up some of Margaret's old client files. Sentimental, nothing more. The night bookkeeper, a woman named Priya who'd worked for us for 6 years, was locking up. "Mr. Hines," she said, hesitating in that particular way people hesitate when they're deciding whether loyalty to you is worth the risk to themselves. "Did you authorize the new signing authority on the business account?" Vanessa came in Monday with paperwork. Said it was urgent, that you'd approved it by phone. I had not spoken to Vanessa on the phone in 3 weeks. I told Priya I'd look into it. Calmly, like a man checking a delivery date, not a man whose stomach had just dropped through the floor. I went home and pulled the business's operating agreement out of the fireproof safe, Margaret, and I kept in the study closet. I called the bank the next morning, told them I was verifying my own authorization, and asked for a copy of any recent account changes. What came back by fax that afternoon was a document adding Vanessa Marie Hines as a co-signer on the Hines Woodworks operating account, with a signature, mine, that I had never made. It wasn't even a good forgery. My real signature has a hook on the W. This one didn't. I called Daniel and Vanessa over for dinner that Sunday. Kept it light. Roast chicken, the same recipe Margaret used to make. I waited until dessert to slide the faxed page across the table. Can you explain this? Vanessa didn't flinch. That's the first thing I noticed. No flinch, no pause, just a smooth pivot into something that sounded like it had been rehearsed in a mirror. Dad, can I call you Dad? This is standard succession planning. With Margaret's passing, the business needed interim signing continuity to avoid a lapse in vendor payment authorization. I looped in Daniel. I assumed you'd want the operational burden lifted, given everything you're going through. Jargon. A lot of it. Enough that Daniel nodded along like it made sense to him too. I said, "That's thoughtful of you," and passed the potatoes. I did not believe one word. The following week, I stopped by their house to drop off a box of Margaret's kitchenware Vanessa had asked for sentimental reasons, she'd said. I let myself in through the side door, the way I'd done for 15 years, and I heard her voice from the kitchen before I saw her. He's 68, and he just lost his wife, Daniel. He's not going to notice a signature on a bank form. Old men don't read fine print, they read headlines. By the time he figures out what's his and what's ours, it'll already be restructured. That's not stealing. That's just being faster. Daniel's response was quieter, but I heard enough of it to know it wasn't a no. I set the box down on the porch, knocked like I'd just arrived, and let Vanessa open the door and hug me and thank me for the kitchenware for sentimental reasons. That was when I hired someone. Not a private investigator with a trench coat. A forensic accountant named Marisol Ochoa, recommended by Roger, who specialized in exactly this kind of quiet family robbery. It took her 17 days to find it. The forged signing authority wasn't the plan. It was the cover for the plan. Vanessa had been using the account access to route $81,000 over 6 weeks into a shell LLC registered to an address that turned out to be a UPS mailbox store 2 towns over. The LLC's registered agent was Vanessa herself. She wasn't planning to inherit a share of the business. She was planning to hollow it out before anyone else could inherit anything at all. I made a decision that night, sitting alone in the study with Marisol's report and a cup of coffee gone cold. I was going to become an old man. Not really. But on the surface, in every room Vanessa was in, I was going to become exactly what she'd called me at that kitchen door. Slow, sentimental, reading headlines instead of fine print. I stopped correcting her when she talked over me. I started repeating myself in conversations, asking the same question about the trust twice in one visit, letting my voice trail off mid-sentence like I'd lost the thread. I started using a cane I didn't need for my hip, even though my hip was fine. I let my hands shake a little when I signed things, the real shake I'd had at the reading. Except now I was doing it on purpose, and it cost me nothing because I'd already felt what the real one felt like. Inside, I was doing math. Every visit, every dinner, I was cataloging dates, dollar amounts, names. Outside, I was a widower fading a little more each week, grateful, so grateful, that his daughter-in-law was handling things. "You're being so patient with him," I heard Daniel tell Vanessa once, not knowing I was in earshot on the porch. "He's not going to be a problem," she said. "He barely remembers what day it is." I remembered every single day. I remembered them in ledger form. I set the bait on a Thursday. I told Vanessa, over coffee, in my slowest and most confused voice, that I'd been thinking about simplifying things, that maybe it was time to sign the business over to her and Daniel entirely, so I don't have to worry about the paperwork anymore. I said Roger could draw something up. I said I trusted her. Her eyes lit up in a way she didn't quite manage to hide. I told her I'd bring the finalized transfer documents to a small family dinner the following Saturday, Margaret's birthday, as it happened, which made the timing feel almost cruel on my part, And I let myself feel that for exactly one night before I reminded myself who had started this. What I actually brought to that dinner was a folder full of real documents. Marisol's full forensic report, the forged signature analysis from a handwriting examiner, 6 weeks of bank transfer records, and a printout of the Shell LLC's registration paperwork with Vanessa's name on it in black and white. I also brought a phone. Not for calls. It sat in my breast pocket that night, recording, its microphone aimed at the table the whole meal, because Marisol had told me one thing worth remembering. People confess loudest right before they think they've won. I'd also asked Roger to be 5 minutes late on purpose, and to bring someone with him. A detective named Frank Calloway, who Marisol had already briefed, sat outside in an unmarked car down the street, watching the clock. Dinner was at my house. Daniel, Vanessa, my sister Ruth, and 2 of Margaret's oldest friends, invited because Vanessa liked an audience and I, for once, was counting on that exact habit. Vanessa arrived wearing Margaret's sapphire brooch. She'd asked to borrow it, for sentimental reasons, 11 days earlier. I hadn't said a word about it since. I'd just watched her pin it to her collar like a trophy, and I let my hand rest on the folder in my lap and waited. She was in rare form that night. Loud with confidence, generous with little jabs. "Walter's memory really has slipped," she said to Ruth, refilling her own wine glass without offering the bottle around. "Bless him. It's a good thing Daniel and I stepped up when we did. Somebody had to." "To stepping up," she said, raising her glass, smiling straight at me. I set down my fork. I did not raise my voice. I have never once needed to raise my voice to be heard clearly. "You're right," I said. "Somebody did have to step up." Marisol Ochoa did, when she traced $81,000 out of Hines Woodworks into an LLC registered to a UPS mailbox on Route 12, an LLC with your name on the paperwork, Vanessa. The table went still. A handwriting examiner did, when he confirmed the signature adding you as a co-signer on our business account wasn't mine. Never was. Vanessa's smile hadn't fully left her face yet. It would. And Detective Calloway did, I said, glancing toward the front window, where headlights had just turned into the driveway, exactly on schedule, when I gave him everything 11 days ago. I reached up, unclasped the sapphire brooch from her collar before she could pull back. She was too stunned to stop me, and set it gently on the table between us. "This belonged to my wife," I said. "She wore it to our son's wedding. You do not get to wear it while you rob his family." Then I picked up the folder, slid out the fake transfer document I'd promised her, the one she thought was coming to finalize the theft, and I tore it once, cleanly, down the middle, and set the 2 halves on either side of the brooch. Detective Calloway knocked on the door 40 seconds later. In the 6 weeks that followed, the consequences moved the way consequences move once you stop protecting someone from them. Vanessa was charged with forgery and embezzlement in the 2nd degree. The Shell LLC's records, combined with the bank forgery, gave the district attorney more than enough. She took a plea agreement 8 months later, restitution of the full $81,000, 5 years probation, and a permanent bar from holding any signing authority tied to a business she doesn't own. Daniel wasn't charged. Marisol's records showed he hadn't signed anything himself and hadn't known the full scope, only that he'd stayed quiet in the room while it happened, which is its own kind of failure, one he's still working through in therapy twice a week, on his own dime, not mine. He and Vanessa separated 4 months after the dinner. He moved into an apartment above what used to be Ashby's law office. He calls me every Sunday now. Sometimes I pick up right away. Sometimes I let it ring twice first, not out of spite, just because some habits, even the honest ones, take time to rebuild. Priya, the bookkeeper who'd first tipped me off with nothing but a hesitant sentence in a parking lot, got a $15,000 bonus and a promotion to office manager. I told her the business survives on people who say something when it would be easier to say nothing. Roger waived his fee for the estate correction work. Margaret's 2 old friends, the ones who'd sat at that table and watched the whole thing unfold, got flowers and a handwritten note from me, because they didn't ask to be there for that, and they didn't deserve the discomfort of it. The sapphire brooch sits in the fireproof safe now. I take it out sometimes. I don't lend it to anyone. It was raining the night Vanessa came back. 9 months after the dinner. No car in the driveway. I found out later she'd sold it during the restitution scramble. She stood on my porch in a coat too thin for the weather, mascara doing what rain does to mascara, and she said my name like it still meant something to her. Walter, please. I have nowhere else to go tonight. Just for one night. I'm not asking for money. I swear. I stood in the doorway a long moment. The porch light caught the same collar she used to wear that brooch on. You forged my name, I said, quiet, the way I say everything that matters. You stole from my son's future to build your own. You called me an old man who couldn't read fine print in my own daughter-in-law's kitchen, 12 feet from where I was standing. I was desperate. People do things when they're desperate. So am I said. Desperate to keep the rest of what my wife and I built for the people who actually deserve it. I told her I hoped she found somewhere warm and dry that night, and that I meant that honestly. Then I closed the door. Ruth was in the kitchen when I came back in, kettle already on, because Ruth has known me 68 years and knew exactly what that knock would be before I said a word. You all right? She asked. I will be, I said, and for the first time since April, I believed it when I said it. Here's what I learned, the hard way, at 68 years old. Grief makes you an easy target, but it doesn't have to make you a permanent one. The people who count you out because you're quiet, or slow, or sad, are usually the same people who forget that quiet and slow and sad can also be patient. And patient is how the truth gets caught. Protect what you built, not out of bitterness, but because the people who actually love you deserve to see it protected. If you were in Walter's shoes, would you have played it slow like he did, or confronted her the moment you found that fax? Tell me in the comments. If this story hit home, hit like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.